This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of A Step Beyond the Fire podcast. As you all may have noticed, I've decided to shift the show to more of like a monthly format, so that's going to be the direction that we're going to proceed probably for the foreseeable future. I want to welcome a friend of mine named Ben Cossel. Benjamin is the Public Affairs Officer for the U.S. Forest Service out of the Stanislaus National Forest in Sonora, California. So in addition to his role with the U.S. Forest Service, he's a Bronze Star recipient, an EMT, a firefighter, and he's also an experienced incident management team member. Welcome, Ben. I really appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks, Cully. I've been looking forward to this conversation, so thank you.
Did I get your last name right?
Yes, sir, you did. Yep.
Pronounced it correctly? Good. So I wanted to ask you kind of first to start things off a little bit. Would you mind explaining for the listeners a little bit more about what it is that you do and how that kind of fits into the bigger picture with the U.S. Forest Service?
Yeah, no problem. So as you said, I'm the Public Affairs Officer for the Stanislaus National Forest. Now, I'll take a step back. For folks who don't know, the Stanislaus is in the Central Sierras. Yosemite National Park is our southern neighbor. So if you can picture in your head Yosemite, when you come out the northern border there on Highway 120 in California, you're in the Stanislaus. So that's where we are geographically. I'm the Public Affairs Officer. What does that mean? Well, it can mean a lot of things depending upon who you ask. But if you ask me, my job is to tell the story of what, everybody on the forest is doing. And so much of our focus right now, especially out here in the Western forest, is fires, fuels reduction, all things along those lines. So I spend a lot of time right now with that. And obviously we've got a lot of fires out here in the West. So spend a lot of time on my incident management team, but I also tell the story of my biologist, my botanist, just a week and a half ago, I was hiking out up into our upper elevations to do a story on our amphibian survey crews. They were out there documenting the Yosemite toad up in some of our higher lake elevations. So I tend to think I have one of the best jobs. I thought the same thing when I was in the military. I think the same thing now. I get to see a little bit of everybody, get to know a little bit of everything that's going on in the forest. And, if it's happening, I'm telling the world about it on our forest. So that's the job of a public affairs officer.
That sounds like a lot of fun. You get to see lots of different projects and kind of get involved in. I would imagine you probably get to pursue things that you're excited and passionate about too, along in that realm, right?
Oh, completely. I mean, this is why, I focus so much on fire. Having that background as a firefighter, I was a structure and wildland fire out in Wyoming with Laramie County Fire District number 5. And then I was a volunteer out here in California with Central Calaveras. In addition to my military time and what have you, it's just definitely been a passion of mine. So I've spent a lot of time focusing on that, but you can't watch the ear-to-ear grin on a forest pathologist talk about bugs and insects on the forest without getting a warm feeling in your heart and knowing like, man, I got the best job. This guy is so darn happy with what he's doing. And, his passion is clearly coming through. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. A lot of interesting characters in the scientific world too that you run across.
Not only that, but I'm convinced that 3/4 of us are introverts. So a great challenge of mine is getting them to actually open up and talk. And the best way to do that is just go spend time with them in the field, where they kind of in their element and they can kind of be who they are. And that's when you get to see the Martin McKenzies of the world just come alive.
Yeah, we've had a handful of folks from the U.S. Forest Service on this show, and the diversity of things that are really going on around the country is just incredible. I learn something new every time I hear from one of your folks. I worked with the folks a little bit on the Ocala National Forest, and to see the diversity of of endemic plant and wildlife species down there. But you translate that to so many different properties all around the country. There's just a huge network, and it's a good. It's always a good opportunity to connect with folks and listen and hear the stories and get to learn a little something along the way. So.
Well, when I talk to college kids about it, right, they're like, oh, what can I do in the Forest Service? I don't want to be a forester. I'm like, man, if you can think it, you can do it. Like, I got hydrologists, I've got botanists, I've got animal scientists, I've got this, I've got that. What do you want to do? Do you want to be an admin specialist? I got that. Do you want to be an HR person? I got that. Don't want to be out in the field? I got a job for you. No worries. Want to be nothing but in the field? I got a job for you. Let's go.
I love that. Well, the next thing I wanted to touch on a little bit, you mentioned it earlier. So fire in the western part of the U.S. is a much different beast, obviously, than what we deal with here in the Southeast, for the most part. I'd say that's pretty much true across the board. So really, it's a horse of a different color. Can you talk a little bit more about that and some of the work that you're doing on the western, in the western wildland fire scene?
Yeah. It's funny that you say, you talk about the differences. I have a lot of conversations with my Washington office counterparts, and a very, very smart woman by the name of Tracy Farley. She's kind of in charge of communications for our wildfire crisis strategy, which I'll come back to. And she's been with the Forest Service all her life out in Arkansas. And kind of like you guys, right? Like, they're able to put up big numbers when they do prescribed fire. And I was talking to her how we were doing the happy dance because we were able to get 2,000 acres in a season. And she's like, I think we do that in a day. I'm like, oh, Tracy, you do not understand the differences between Western landscapes and Southeastern landscapes. So, yeah, it's a whole horse of a different color out here, right? I say we have a lot of compounding problems. You got climate change, obviously, just drying everything out, making everything worse, which leads to droughts, longer droughts. I mean, California, where I'm at, as an ecosystem, has always experienced droughts. Like, that's not unusual. What is unusual for us is the length of them. 5-year droughts are becoming 7-year droughts, 7-year droughts are becoming 10-year droughts, things of that nature. So that's making it worse. We have a history, unlike the Southeast, we have a history where we removed cultural knowledge, indigenous knowledge from our landscape as far as fire management, using fire as a tool for resource management on the landscape. The cost of living out here is so insanely expensive. I mean, I wouldn't want to live any other place in the world, don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to lie, it's expensive to live out here. And so what happens there is more and more folks are going deeper and deeper into the WUI, the wildland urban interface. And so you've got more houses deeper into the forest. We have a buildup of material. We've got, where I'm at here in the Sierras, and a lot of the western forests are in the same situation. You've got some steep terrain that just fire gets on the bottom part of that hillside or that mountain, and it just takes off, right? It's gone to the races. And fighting fire in those conditions, environments. I mean, within the wildland firefighting community, there's forgive me, Cully, so you might have to edit this one out, but there's a famous saying of F the Klamath, because the Klamath National Forest is so damn hard to fight fire in that if you can, the saying out here in the Western United States is, if you can fight fire in the Klamath, you can fight fire anywhere. And that's really similar for a lot of the forests out here in the West, right? Like, the terrain is just so bad. And then you go down to Southern California, right? It shifts. You get down to Southern California and you start getting into like Manzanita and Mesquite and all these other just horrible, nasty desert fires that just burn so hot and so rapidly. So in California, you have a whole bunch of different dynamic landscapes with that bring up this whole new series of challenges for firefighting. It's why we like to make sure that our guys on the Stanislaus get out to different areas in California to really expand that, their experience on what we're fighting and what we're seeing on a regular basis.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The very first time I heard an in-depth conversation with somebody about this was when I was going to Eureka for a wedding or actually the wedding was in Arcata.
So you know the Klamath.
I remember it, yeah, because so flying into that little airport, I just happened to sit next to a forestry professor at
Was it Humboldt State? Yeah,
Humboldt State forestry professor, and we spent, I think the last leg of the trip was from maybe Salt Lake over, and we talked for about an hour and a half on the flight about this very same thing, about this, how difficult it is to find just to get the correct weather conditions to try to make up the backlog acreage that is those long unburned fuels that tend to dry out and become extremely difficult to deal with. So you've got, 50, 100 years sometime in some cases of backlog acreage. You've got very erratic weather conditions. In Florida, we're blessed in a lot of ways with, some areas of Florida can burn every month of the year. Like I worked with a crew that could do that.
That's awesome.
Central Florida, but we get all the precip is way different. Our weather conditions are way different, and that kind of thing. But anyway, it was a very enlightening conversation. I'm like, man, this is an issue that's not going to just go away in a short amount of time. It's going to take another century to actually try to get ahead of this stuff, or maybe more.
Yeah, no, I mean, easily, right? So like if you go back into the Forest Service history, you got to go back to 1910, right? And the big burn of 1910, 3 million acres in like 4 days, something like that in Montana, right? People killed, houses destroyed, so on and so forth. And what you get out of that is what we call the 10 a.m. policy, right? Like all fires will be suppressed by 10 a.m. the next day. So that leads to 100 years of fire suppression. When I talk about this, the one thing I like to say is like, so many people like to point fingers at this group or that group or this group or that group. I'm like, you know what? Honestly, there's enough blame to go around for everybody here. Yeah. So you got the 10 a.m. policy. So we're suppressing everything. And then timber folks are out there, our timber folks are out there, and they're taking down trees at a rate that a lot of folks don't like. So all of a sudden we stopped cutting at the same rate we were cutting at. So now you've got 100 years worth of fire debt building up. You've got forests that aren't being thinned the way they should be thinned because we cut back on logging. And we have slash piles out there. I mean, it's just this buildup of compounding issues that have gotten us into this situation that we're in today, not least of which is just taking indigenous knowledge off the land. And, we live here, we talk about the fact that we live in a fire-dependent, not even fire-adapted, fire-dependent ecosystem, right? Like this area has grown, has come up over millennia to depend on fire. And we took it off the landscape. So we are seeing all these problems out there because we took fire off the landscape. And I think about it, and I was talking to the Region 3 smoke manager, Region 2. Sorry, Amber, I'm going to get this wrong. Dr. Amber Ortega. She's they call her Dr. Smoke. She's amazing. But she's one of the things that she talked about is fire is the only natural occurrence that we actually try and stop. If you think about it, right? We don't try and stop earthquakes. We build better homes. We don't try and stop hurricanes. We try and build better, higher up or whatever. All these natural occurrences, except fire. We actually try and stop this natural process. And that's, end of day, that's the biggest part of our problem is we stop this natural process from happening in the ecosystems that need it.
Yeah, it's good to think about it in terms of a lot of people don't think of fire as a natural process, right? There's all this, I kind of been harping on this for a while now, and a lot of the folks that are doing educational stuff are talking about it a lot, where it's, fire is an important, just as natural part of the ecosystem as any other component, right? But we've just taken it out over a long period of time and changed the landscape through a lot of different means, and like you said, it's not any one person's fault. It's just a unique problem, a unique challenge that we're having to face now. And I think this is a good time to talk about some of the things you guys are doing to combat this.
Yeah. So around 2021, the Forest Service put out its wildfire crisis strategy, right? Part of that was a ambitious goal to treat I think it was like 10 million acres or some insane number of acres. I don't remember the exact number. I have to look it up for you. A year through with fuels reduction. And that was a combination of, mechanical thinning, hand thinning, but more importantly, prescribed fire, getting prescribed fire back on the ground. Out of that came in around late 2021, what they called the wildfire crisis strategy landscapes. Those were landscapes that were identified because they were in high hazard fire sheds, right? We think of these things now in fire sheds. And they were, through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, they were given supplemental funding to go out and do these massive fuel treatments. My forest supervisor, Jason Kuyken, loves to talk about the fact that, like, if we are going to make a dent in the wildfire crisis strategy, we have to be operating at the pace and scale of wildfires, right? You got the Dixie Fire consuming 1.1 million acres. So how do we as an agency start trying to get to that level? Well, I mean, we're not 100% there yet, but we're getting there. So here on the Stanislaus, we have the wildfire crisis landscape, Stanislaus. We've got about, with that total and a couple other projects that have fallen underneath that umbrella, we've got about 305,000 acres now under National Environmental Protection Act. The documentation that says we can move forward. So for those of you who don't know federal process, it is a very long, complicated road to tipping torches. You got to have NEPA in place and all these other documentation. But so we have over 305,000 acres under NEPA. And that allows us to go through, start thinning the forest back to what it looked like in 1900 actually, and actually putting fire back on the ground. It's going to be a long process, right? So many of those areas that we're looking at, if you looked at a map and you looked at the Stanislaus National Forest, we're divided by three major highways: California Highway 4, California Highway 108, California Highway 120. Most of this work takes place along California Highway 108. You start from Sonora, you go east up over the Sonora Pass. It's all right there in that area. We are thinning, we are burning, we are treating, we are putting in fuel breaks around communities. Last year, we implemented the prescribed burn implementation plan. So one of the big problems within the Forest Service is that prescribed fire isn't looked at the same way wildfire is. So if you have a wildfire, it's a wildfire. Prescribed fire is a project, and financial codes are different. So the example I love to use is, a crew shows up for a wildfire. They need to go out and they need to get a pallet of water. The purchasing person goes down to Walmart, puts it on their purchase card, comes back with a couple pallets of water, and off the crew goes. Can't do that on a prescribed fire. You have to actually go through a whole different process. Our purchasing agents can't go down to Walmart, put it on their card, and bring it back to the crew. You have to actually go through contracts and all these other things. So there's been some things that we've worked through there, but we implemented this pilot program. We had probably at our height, we had about 655 firefighters. That's not counting overhead. If you put overhead in that equation too, you're probably looking at closer to like 800, 850 total personnel on ground doing prescribed fire over a holiday weekend, Memorial Day last year, literally right next door to communities. I had guys out there tipping torches as folks were coming out on their back deck, sipping their morning coffee, waving to each other. That's how close we were to houses. Wow. Yeah. And so with that, we were able to treat about, on those particular burns, we were able to get about 5,000 acres here on the stand. And what we're looking at
big
is
acreage.
It's big acreage, and these are our hard acres, right? These are our acres that are right next to towns, that are right next to roadways. So, we're putting up fire, we're putting up smoke. We're getting all sorts of folks upset with us and wanting to know why we're ruining their holiday weekend and all these other things. But as we get further and further out away from our actual communities, I think we'll actually start getting bigger acres. I think we'll be able to put up like 8,000, 10,000, 15,000 acres a year once we start getting into lower complexity burns. Because obviously, there's a lot more resources, a lot more planning, a lot more time. But when this is all said and done, we will have 305,000 acres treated. And that's just the start, right? This is not, we are fully admitting, we're not just going to treat these acres and then walk away. We are throwing down the gauntlet and saying, this is a new way forward. This is how we do, forest management from this point forward, is not just do these 10 and then off we go. We're going to come back. For folks who follow your podcast are probably familiar with like fire return intervals. In some of the areas that I work in, that we're working in, our fire return interval for that band of elevation is about 5 to 7 years. Go up a little bit more, you're looking at 7 to 12. Come up a little bit higher, we're in like the 15 to 20, and we go up to our higher elevation, we're looking at 100 years. So we're really down here making plans to come back 5 to 6 years to retreat those areas within that proper fire return interval band. So again, this is just a down payment. This is just a start. But, again, part of too what's slowing us down is so many of these areas, they haven't seen treatment in 10, 15, 20 years. So you got to go in there and thin it before we can put fire on the ground, right? We're not just going to go out there and start tipping torches and set the whole damn fire on forest. Doing it properly. We're doing it smart. As we like to say, the right fire at the right place at the right time. And so with all that, we're reducing the risk to our community. We're very careful not to say, we're protecting our community, because where we live, there is no guarantee. We are reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfire. And I'm very careful when I talk to people about that, because I want to make sure that we're properly managing expectations, right? I'm not saying I'm making your community bulletproof. I'm telling you that I'm reducing the risk of a wildfire coming through here and just tearing down the town like it's done in so many of our towns out here in California. Another interesting feature of this forest and where we are you familiar with wooden flume systems?
It sounds familiar. I can't picture it though.
Yeah, so no worries. I mean, it's an antiquated system, so you could be forgiven for not being real up the key on it. But so Sonora and the communities around here were all old gold mining towns, and miners developed this incredibly intricate system of flumes and ditches that brought water from the high elevations down to Sonora. So our highest elevation, Sonora Pass, is around 9,000 feet. Down here in Sonora, I'm at about 2,500. But there's no water down here. It's all up there. So they had to find a way to get it down to where they were working in the mines. So they built this system of wooden flumes and ditches that go from like the different lakes and reservoirs up in our higher elevation down into town. Well, those flume systems are original to when they were built in like the 1890s. So they're still old redwood timber. And you can just imagine how easy it would be for those to burn up. Now, that flume system carries the water source for all of Tuolumne County. So I'm looking at about, if a fire were to break out in Stanislaus and impact those flumes, I have no water for 40,000 people.
I'm going to have to Google some pictures of what those actually look like.
I will send them to you. I've taken them. I will share a link with you.
Yeah, I'd like to see how that whole system works, and also some pictures of that fire, that prescribed burning you were doing too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was absolutely beautiful. And we got back at it again this year. I think we may have been a victim of our own success a little bit this year, because everybody saw what we did last year and they tried to do it. So we couldn't get as many resources this year as we had last year. But we still put some good acres down, before we had to basically shut everything off, because just combination of weather and resources was getting the best of us. We were looking at burning in the community of Cedar Ridge, and my burn boss was going up checking his fuel sticks, and he wanted them at like 12 to 15%, and they were repeatedly coming back like 7 to 10%. So we were like, yeah, no, we're not going to burn.
Yeah, that's a whole different ballgame than what we deal with here. But with this big ambitious plan that you guys are working on and all the great headway that you've made so far, what's the biggest challenge that you've come across really in this type of large scale effort?
Smoke is the number one issue that I think we work with. And honestly, man, it's not even really smoke. So San Francisco and all of the Bay Area is about, give or take a nickel, depending upon which highway you take, an hour and a half to 2 hours west of me. So we regularly get recreation visitors to the forest. And a whole bunch of folks that live in the Bay Area Monday through Friday have really expensive cabins up here in the mountains. They don't live here every day. And this is nothing against them. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not slagging on anybody. but this is not their lived experience. So they don't understand as deeply as the people who live here why we're putting smoke in the air, why we're putting fire right back to their back porch, why we're doing all this work that we're doing. So communicating with that group of people has been really challenging, because it's not like I can just go, hold a town hall meeting on a Wednesday night, because most of them are in San Francisco or Modesto or Sacramento or, Oakland, wherever it is they're coming from. So finding ways to communicate with them, to get them to understand why this work is important, that a little bit of smoke now, better than a lot of smoke later, that the smoke is actually cleaner in a prescribed burn versus a wildfire. I mean, just all these different advantages and benefits to it, and really reaching them. And even some of our, locals, when we were burning last year, I think we ended up burning for something like 30 days straight. And no surprise, people got smoke fatigue. So that was a big issue.
Yeah,
and then
I can imagine.
The one that I'm starting to see, I really started to see it this year, more so than last year, although I think I started to see the beginnings of it last year, is the mental health issue around fire. Like, I think about all the fires that have been in this community, right? You got the Butte fire in 2015, you got the Donnell fire in 2018, you had the Rim fire in 2013, got fires burning. I mean, and those are just the ones in our immediate area, big catastrophic fires. I was standing at an overlook with one of my information officers, and this woman comes screeching in. She jumps out of the car, and she is just bawling. She is just bawling and wants to know what's going on. And we start trying to explain to her that's prescribed fire. And she lost everything in the Donnell fire. And it completely triggered all those feelings and emotions and everything that she had from having lost that and seeing the smoke and smelling the smoke and not knowing what was going on. So the smoke and the mental health of folks who have just gone through so many of these catastrophic wildfires, I think, are my two biggest issues that I personally am facing.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a complex scenario that you've got there, and figuring out ways to reach people in very urban areas like San Francisco. I can imagine there's a lot of challenges to overcome there. And the good thing is, we have a lot of different tools that we didn't have, 20 years ago, 15 years ago to do those kind of things. But that doesn't mean it's any less of a challenge. It's definitely more so.
Well, and the question is how do I effectively reach Grandpa and Junior, right? Like, with all the different communications tools, we've also become a little bit more segmented in how we get. I mean, how do you make a funny TikTok about smoke? I mean, never mind the fact that we can't even use TikTok in the federal government, right? But like an Instagram reel or something like that appeals to them, but then also something that's serious enough to apply to Wally and Ethel, who are coming up for the weekend, and don't understand why they can't have their barbecue because it's smoked out.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough scenario. I would agree that, one of the ones you mentioned, smoke management, is, I talk about that a lot with people that, doing prescribed burning in a small, like relatively small urban interface type scenario within the city limits here. The biggest thing that keeps me up at night is not the fire getting out, jumping the line, none of that. It's the smoke, and I live in a pretty progressive community when it comes to those kind of things. And it's, here with the University of Florida, and there's a lot of people that understand why we need these kind of things. But again, it still is a challenge, especially, we're constantly, even if we have perfect weather conditions, the day of to get the job done, if there's fog in the forecast that night, it's a no-go.
Right.
I could have 3 days of beautiful, perfect weather conditions, but if there's fog in the forecast, it's like, sorry, guys.
Yep.
Even for small acreage too, like I did one not that long ago, maybe about a year ago, and there was, I don't know, I was on the way to check my burn, and it was just daylight, and I remember tuning in the radio, and then one of the local channels said, "Oh, geez, we got a report of smoke on a road over here near so and so." I was like, "Oh my God, that's where my burn is!" And of course, I get down there, There's no smoke anywhere. And I'm like, what's going on here? But they saw the smoke sign. Somebody saw the smoke sign and called in, and there was fog, like a little tiny patch of fog in the area, and they put two and two together, and I don't know. So
Two and two made five.
those kinds of things can really hurt a program if,
Yeah.
especially if something happens, somebody got hurt. That it's a very fragile. I guess one way of putting it is very fragile position that you're in when it comes to smoke.
No, 100%. And I'll tell you, one of the really nice things that came out of this strawberry burn, I mean, there were a lot of it, but for me specifically was, I definitely, I got to take a minute and say, like, my forest supervisor is a really forward thinking individual, and he's really kind of got his pulse on things. And one of the things he and I were talking about early on when we started seeing the direction things were going with the public and comments and smoke, he's like, we've got to figure out how to get the air managers involved in these, in these conversations and this messaging and all of this. And so we started having biweekly meetings with both regional and national level EPA. And then out of that, we brought into the fold our public health department. So now I've got this incredible relationship with my county public health officials, and we do a lot of work together developing smoke messaging, getting that out there to our public, coming up with actionable items for what people can do. When we have a prescribed burn, they have, because we're the federal government, we're not allowed to collect, name, address, things like that, right? Personally identifiable information. Well, county health is not restricted in such a way. So we're able to use their demographic information to reach our audience with that outreach material. And say, like, look, this is what's going on. These are the things you can do. Here's some clean air centers. We'll work with public health. They'll work with the county library to try and get make some space available for folks. If you're stuck in your house and you can't get out and you're smoked out, you're an older person and you have mobility issues, call us. We will figure out ways to come get you and bring you down. And, here's how to make a microfilter box fan and make a clean room in your house when we have these smoke events. So that's been a really positive development for us, is that reforming that relationship with both EPA, the air managers, and the public health officials. That has paid off in droves.
Pretty awesome to hear about, with getting different entities involved in spreading the message. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about these things, and it can be difficult, but there are those tips and tricks like the box fan technique. I need to look that one back up. I haven't looked at that one in a while, but I should post something about the box fan technique, because if you're in an area and it's really smoky, it's one that can actually work pretty well, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and what I've heard, like Dr. Ortega talk about, is get yourself like one of those little portable air quality monitors, right? The purple air, and it'll, flash what color the air quality is, and like make a sealed room in your house, right? With fans and air conditioning so you're not hot, but seal it off, and then use the micro fans to pull the pollutants out, and you will watch that air quality monitor go from purple to green like that. So, I would say make it a comfortable room. Make sure you got plenty of snacks and maybe a TV, so you're not bored, because you might be in there for a minute. But I mean, I think, folks like you and the work that you're doing, I think is also critical, because, you're helping getting the word out to people who maybe don't understand smoke and fire, and understand too that, like, hey, look, there's also got to be a level of accountability for each one of us, right? We have the autonomy to make our own decisions, to be like, if you've lived in Twain Harte all your life, you know what the winds do at night. You know what our inversion layers will look like. So maybe tonight, because the smoke is moving, you can open up your windows. So people got to like also inform themselves and have a better understanding of all of these processes. I definitely think, and this is getting a little bit more philosophical than fire, is that, losing our connection to nature and understanding the world around us is like at our own demise. So the more we understand, what do my winds do at night, on a typical basis, right? Obviously, there's those exceptional events. But, what do my winds do? What is, how does the drainages that are around me work? How do they funnel air and smoke in my area? What am I actually looking at? Maybe I don't need to close my windows, right? Maybe it's going to go right around me because I'm up high and the canyon's pulling it this way, and there's a river right below me that's causing its own natural vacuum, and, all the different things that people who know their natural environment are going to know and understand. So I can give you all the tips and tricks in the world, but nothing is ever going to replace your knowledge of your area and what things do during the 24 hours that we call a day.
Yeah, you're talking about smoke moving up and down drainages. I've seen smoke do some interesting things. There's a river here in this part of Florida called the St. Johns River. And probably some folks that are listening are familiar with it, but I used to work on a big state-owned tract of property that was along the St. Johns. And when I first got there, I was at this thing that all these state properties do called a land management review. So each, these properties go through like a 10-year review process. So I'm riding around with these forestry guys, and they talked about, because the forest area supervisor was there, he said, yeah, one of the things you have to be aware of in this area with your smoke is that the smoke will actually, when the tide changes in the river, it'll move upriver or downriver depending on what the tide is doing sometimes.
Yep.
So that kind of adds another element of, kind of complexity to what you're doing.
100%, right? If I live, like, say, up in Pinecrest, where I'm in a huge ass basin, the smoke is just going to sit there. That is what it's going to do to the morning winds come in and move it out of there at night. It's just going to sit there. So, yeah, no, nothing can replace that knowledge of where we are, right? And your local ecosystem, your local environment. We're going to do everything in our power to mitigate things as much as we possibly can. But I cannot replace the old timer that's been living up in that cabin, right, for 30 years, knows the deer by name and knows which way the winds blows, and when the oak turns brown, it's time to pull in the onions or whatever. And again, I'll say it again, like we have lost our ability to do that. We've lost our ability to just go interact with our environment and learn from it. And I mean, I can't help but think that all of it's related, right? Like, why did we take fire off the landscape? Because we stopped paying attention to the land. That's a huge part of it, right? We just stopped listening to the land, and the land tells us what it needs if you know how to listen to it.
Yeah, that's a level of intuition that a lot of us don't have so much anymore. That's for sure.
No, not at all. And I definitely think that if we're going to get through some of this stuff, like, I don't know, is it, what would you even call it? Would you call it a fluency in how nature speaks, or what would it even be, right? But like, somehow we got to get our natural world fluency back, even if it's just a little bit, right? Get back to that like 5-year-old rudimentary level. So at least I can understand the big obvious stuff. I may not get the subtle nuance, but at least I get the big stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's still a lot more work to be done when it comes to spreading the word. And, there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming up over the next decade or two in your world, I'm sure. And if folks want to learn a little bit more about that, the Wildfire Crisis Strategy Implementation Plan, where can they go to find out more about it?
So they can come visit me on the Stanislaus. And it's an incredible...
I like that option. Maybe I might take you up on that.
Yeah, so it's an incredibly, number one, come visit me on the Stanislaus. Like, literally walk into the supervisor's office, say, I heard you on Cully's podcast. I want to go see what you're doing. I will take you out, because I love nothing more than just being on the forest. That I actually have written into my my work calendar, Forest Fridays, and I am out on the forest. You will not find me in the office.
Nice.
But if they just wanted to get some general knowledge about what we're doing here on the Stanislaus landscape, Cully, I'm going to share a URL with you that maybe you can put in the show notes or whatever, that it will probably work best. But we've developed on our Stanislaus National Forest webpage, we've developed a pretty comprehensive, like, this is what the wildfire crisis strategy is. This is what the Stanislaus landscape is. I've got one-on-one presentations. I've got massive file size maps. So I've got fire history of the Stanislaus National Forest from 1908 to 2023. It's a 25 meg file. So if you happen to be one of those people that are still out there on dial-up, probably don't go for it. But most normal internet connections can probably have it. But you can scroll, you can zoom in on these things to the insane level. That's probably the best way. And then just going to the Forest Service website. There's a whole section on the Forest Service website, the big Forest Service website, about the wildfire crisis strategy, about the 21 landscapes that are doing this work in the Western United States, and how we're going to accomplish it, what the commitment means, and this down payment to the American people that we're trying to make with this 10-year, because again, it's a down payment, right? Like, this is a new way of doing forest management. We've already seen that the old ways cannot and will not work. We've got to change direction, and that is what we're doing.
Far out. I love it. Well, kudos to you and the great work that you guys are doing, and for you also for spreading the word about that too in your role. And that's critical. We're in a position now where we're needing a lot more of that in our world. So it's definitely appreciated, the work that you guys are doing out there. And I'll definitely look for that URL, and everybody make sure to check the show notes out, and you can see that information. And yeah, that all sounds great. Well, we really appreciate you getting together with us, Ben. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to hearing more from you maybe in the future.
Yo, absolutely. I've been sincere pleasure talking to you, Cully. Yeah, and if there's ever anything I can ever do, just give me a holler. And if you ever make it out to California, come stop in and see me.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again for taking us in another step beyond the fire.